of the most important ecological threats that we are currently experiencing is that of global warming and climate change. And I'd like to start off by saying that one of the arguments against global warming and climate change is that the planet has gone through cycles of warming and cooling. And I am not going to say that the planet has not going to say that we are anywhere near the warmest cycle or the coldest cycle. The reason that this current cycle of warming and climate change is such a big deal is that it coincides with the increase in population size very, very tightly. It coincides with the Industrial Revolution and increases in pollution very tightly. And it is also shocking in the rate at which it is occurring. It's occurring much faster than previous warming and cooling cycles. And it is having a very dramatic effect on the living organisms on our planet. So yes, it is possible that the planet was already going through a warming trend, but the problem is that the warming trend is correlated with human effects on that warming, that we can correlate this drastic increase in exponential growth, our increase in our ecological footprint, an increase in our pollution, that we feel evidence suggests a tight link between a human impact on this global warming. And it is leading to one of the fastest and largest extinctions that we have seen based on fossil evidence. So global warming is an increase in Earth's average temperature. You may have heard something like the Earth has increased 1 degree in so many years. And that might not sound like very much because you might not even notice 1 degree if you go outside. But this is an average global temperature. So a 1 degree change in the entire planet's average temperature is actually rather big. And this is related to the fact that organisms are intimately adapted with their surroundings. And you may recall from Biology 101 that our cells are adapted to very specific conditions. Our cells are adapted to very narrow temperature pH ranges. And the same goes for whole organisms, because whole organisms are essentially a collection of those cells that are adapted to a particular environment. So changing the environment just a little bit can have a profound effect on the organism's survival. Climate change is a long-term change in the Earth's climate or the climate of a particular region. So this is over decades. If it is getting warmer in the summer, if we're getting increased rainfall over many, many years, if we're seeing more intense hurricanes, things like that, changes that are maybe slowly happening but are distinctly different from years ago. Global warming is important because it is being driven by something called the greenhouse effect. Greenhouse effect is when solar radiation passes through the atmosphere and heats the Earth's surface. So in chapter 45, we talked about how solar radiation hits the Earth, it increases productivity, it affects evaporation and rainfall patterns, and we need both higher temperatures and higher evaporation, higher moisture, precipitation for increasing our primary productivity. And the higher the temperature and the higher the precipitation, the general increase in primary productivity. But what happens is that heat and radiation that hits the Earth is bounced some of it bounce back. So some of it is absorbed by plants, some of it is absorbed by the topography of the land, but some of it, a lot of which hits the water or hits our poles, is going to be bounced back. The greenhouse effect comes into play when that radiation that is bounced hits gases up in our atmosphere. And those gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, we'll talk about those in a minute, reflect that heat back. And so some of the solar radiation is lost. It just goes right in between those gases and is lost. So a little bit of heat is lost. But our planet's temperature is maintained by what is essentially an atmospheric blanket filled with greenhouse gases that are reflecting heat and maintaining a stable global temperature. So the greenhouse effect is an increase in this warming. So sunlight comes in, when more radiation is reflected back, it's going to warm the Earth's surface. So the greenhouse effect is not all bad. In fact, we need this insulating blanket to maintain these global temperatures, to maintain stable temperatures that don't include fluctuations of 1 degree Celsius. The problem is that the greenhouse effect can be intensified by changing the balance of the gases that are found in that atmospheric blanket. So carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide are our major greenhouse gases. You can see that there is a natural source for all of these: volcanoes, wildfires, biomass decay. We'll talk more about the carbon cycle a little bit later in the lecture, but these gases do occur naturally. They are released into the atmosphere. The problem is that we also have these human-made sources that increase these gases artificially. So on top of the natural sources, we also have fossil fuel burning, coal burning, landfills, deforestation. All of these are increasing the presence of these greenhouse gases, so putting more of those greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere. We will not go over chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs. Your textbook does go into a little bit. Chlorofluorocarbons are related to the greenhouse effect. They are also related to the breakdown of the ozone layer. So the greenhouse effect and the ozone layer are two separate problems. Again, we aren't going to go into ozone here, but those CFCs do affect both global warming and the ozone layer. CFCs were banned, I believe, in the 80s in the United States and in the EU. And a reduction in them seems to be affecting a reduction in the size of the ozone layer. Ozone hole. If you are curious about CFCs and the ozone layer, please come see me, or you can look it up in your textbook, or you can look it up online. So global warming is concerning ecologists for the reasons that we already talked about: relatively quick increase in temperature, intensification of the greenhouse effect. And so ecologists are concerned that there is evidence that suggests that human increases in these greenhouse gases are intensifying the warming of our planet. So all of our greenhouse gases have increased in concentration since the Industrial Revolution. This is related to changes in emissions, pollution, etc. And looking at ice cores is one way that ecologists can learn about the shift in the greenhouse gases, specifically carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide and water are found in the air. They're also found dissolved in water. And so when ice freezes, the oxygen and the carbon dioxide freezes with it. So ecologists can extract ice cores by essentially drilling, not shooting, what is essentially a straw down into the earth and pulling out this core of ice. Then they can do chemical analysis on it and measure the amount of carbon dioxide that is contained within the water that is frozen in these ice cores. So ice cores suggest that we have this very dramatic increase in carbon dioxide from 1960 to 2020. And then older ice cores suggest this correlation between the carbon dioxide with the Industrial Revolution and, of course, our increase in human population growth. So global warming is expected to continue to cause some problems. You are probably already familiar with some of the chattering about global warming problems. So people have begun to say that hurricanes are becoming more frequent, flooding's more frequent. There are a variety of impacts that we're starting to see that are related to global warming. One of them is changes in sea level. Sea level is the average level of the surface of one or more of the Earth's oceans. It is projected that continued global temperature increases. Some studies suggest up to 3.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, so by 2100 or so. And as a result, this is expected to increase sea levels by as much as 75 centimeters. So this is a drastic increase, especially if you are talking about a coastal community where water is going to be rising. 75 centimeters is roughly 30 inches. So that is quite a lot of water on some of our coastlines. If you think about the amount of ice melt that you need to raise the ocean level by 75 centimeters, this is quite a lot of water, and it has to do with melting of glaciers, but also that water expands as it melts and becomes warmer. So we are starting to see more frequent coastal flooding. Along with the sea temperature rise, we're to see changes in weather patterns, so more frequent hurricanes, more intense thunderstorms, etc. So we have already learned that higher temperatures are going to increase precipitation. We learned that solar radiation warms land, and that increases the evaporation, which increases the water vapor in the air. As that air rises, the warm air cools and condenses into rain. So higher temperatures mean more evaporation and more precipitation. So areas like the equator and some of our warmer tropical and subtropical regions where we would expect heavy precipitation are starting to see more intense precipitation. So more intense hurricanes, more intense rainfall events. The exception is that dry areas are not seeing more precipitation. And this is because as the temperature increases, evaporation increases. But in dry areas such as the desert Southwest and the western half of the United States, there's less moisture to evaporate. And so it doesn't condense into clouds and it doesn't fall back to the ground. So evaporation continues to happen, but it's not, that water vapor is not falling back, replenishing the moisture in those areas. Another pattern that we are expecting to see is the change in species distribution. So if we look at climate changes already, or climate change that is happening already, changes in regional temperatures, there is some evidence that plant and animal species are moving away from the equator towards the poles. And there is an extra credit activity that is located in the ecology unit in Brightspace. If you go there, there is a current events article that talks about one example of changing in distribution of species. So that particular example is talking about tree species moving to higher altitudes. So that's one way we can get cooler temperatures. Another way is to move north. So the diagram on the right shows a potential change in the range of sugar maples. So sugar maples are the maple trees that we find in the Midwest that turn the really vibrant yellows, oranges, and reds in the fall that make our area just absolutely gorgeous. It is predicted that it will become too warm for sugar maples in this area here. So this area right about through here from the end of Lake Michigan to this little bump, that is approximately where we are located. And this is the current part of the current range where sugar maples are located, but it is predicted that it is going to become too dry and too hot in that region, this region here, and those sugar maples will move farther north. The orange is the region where they currently exist and are predicted to continue, but the red is a new region where sugar maples are predicted to move into those latitudes as temperatures continue to increase. If moisture is also reduced, it's going to move farther north, but it's also going to reduce the actual area where there is enough precipitation to support those maples. So again, there is some evidence already that plants and animals are moving northward. As plants move, animals are going to move, follow their food source. The problem is that as they move north, there may not be suitable resources for those organisms that are moving, suitable habitat, suitable plant life, etc., in order to sustain those organisms.